The bundle of Naira notes hit the marble floor with a soft, deliberate slap. 40 guests turned at once. And in the middle of that ballroom in Ikoyi, under 3 chandeliers and the cold blue flash of 40 raised phones, a woman in a grey housekeeper's uniform stood very still, and she did not look down at the money. "Pick it up," Funky said. The smile she wore was one she had rehearsed. "Pick it up and dance for us. 3 million Naira, every note. All you have to do is entertain my guests for 1 song." The woman's name was Amara. She had mopped that same floor at 5:40 that morning. Before the sun came over the compound wall, before anyone else in the house was awake. She had scrubbed a spot near the 3rd pillar where a wine glass had shattered the night before. Her knuckles still smelled faintly of vinegar. She did not move. Somewhere at the back of the room, a violinist raised his bow and then lowered it, not sure if he was expected to play or to leave. 2 guests laughed. 1 did not. A phone camera zoomed slowly in on Amara's face, waiting for the collapse took the shame. The small, quiet breaking of a poor woman in front of a rich one, in front of a crowd trained to enjoy it. None of that happened. What happened instead, in the next 4 minutes and 11 seconds, would end an engagement, ruin a family name, and put the woman in the grey uniform on the front page of a newspaper her mother used to line the kitchen bin with. But we are not there yet. Before we go back, a small favor from me to you. If you believe quiet dignity should outlast loud cruelty, tap the subscribe button and turn on the little bell so the next story like this doesn't get buried on you. And down there in the comments, tell me the name of your city and the time on your clock right now. Lagos, Nairobi, London, Houston, Manila, Ho Chi Minh, wherever you are tonight. I read every one of them, and I like knowing which corner of the world is listening. Now, let me take you back 3 years, to the morning Amara Okafor first walked through the gates of the Adebayo estate. The estate sat behind a wall the color of dried bone on Bordeaux Road, in the part of Ikoyi where the houses have 3 names. The family name, the street name, and a private name. The servants use because saying it wrong is a firing offense. The Adebayo house had all 3. The family called it the estate. The street knew it as the White House. The staff called it, quietly and only among themselves, the mausoleum, because half the rooms were kept sealed and dust-covered for reasons no one who lived there could remember. Amara Okafor stood at the gate on a Tuesday in July, 3 years ago, wearing a navy blouse she had ironed twice because the first time she was thinking of her mother and had left a scorch line near the collar. She was 27 years old. She was carrying a plastic bag with 2 changes of clothes, a small Bible, and a hairnet still in its packaging. She had left Ajagunle at 4 in the morning to catch the second Danfo from Iyana Iba and had crossed the entire city of Lagos to arrive here, at this gate, at this house, for a job interview that lasted 45 seconds. The interview was conducted by a woman named Mama Bisi Okoro, who had run the Adebayo domestic staff for 19 years and could measure a young woman's whole life by how she held her hands during introduction. Amara's hands did not fidget. They also did not lie flat. They rested on the plastic bag as if the bag were a small, living thing she was responsible for. "You have done this work before?" Mama Bisi asked, in Yoruba first and then in English, watching for how Amara's face responded to the switch. "I have not, Ma," Amara said, in English. "But I have kept a house, my mother's, for almost 8 years." "Your mother is unwell?" Amara's mouth did a small thing then, a tightening and a release. "Yes, Ma. She had a stroke on February the 14th, 2 years ago." Mama Bisi nodded once, slowly. She did not ask the follow-up question that most employers ask. "How much do you need to send home?" How much of your salary is not really yours? Do you have children of your own? Because she had already seen the answer in the plastic bag with 2 changes of clothes and a Bible. You start on Thursday, she said. You will sleep in the room above the garage. It is small. The bed is not new. The window faces east, so the sun will wake you. Do you have a problem with the sun waking you? No, Ma. Good, said Mama Bisi. In this house, the sun is the only alarm clock that has never been late. That was how Amara came to work for the Adebayos. The room above the garage was, as promised, small. A single bed with a mattress that sagged towards the middle. A wooden chest of drawers with a mirror on top that had a crack running through the left corner like a river on a map. A window facing east. A ceiling fan that made a soft ticking sound at speed 3 and a louder ticking sound at speed 4. Amara moved in on the Wednesday night, unpacked her plastic bag in 90 seconds, and sat on the edge of the mattress for a long time in the dark, listening to the fan. She did not cry. She had made a decision on the Danfo from Iana Iba, somewhere between Berger and 3rd Mainland Bridge, that she was not going to cry for anything that was already decided. Crying, she had learned, was for the things you could still change. The next morning at 5:40, Amara was already in the kitchen. Mama Bisi noted the time in the small notebook she kept in her apron pocket and did not say a word about it, which was, in Mama Bisi's language, the highest form of compliment. The house had a rhythm to it. The ogre of the house, Mr. Tunde Adebayo, CEO of Adebayo Holdings, 42 years old and rarely at home, kept his schedule on a fridge magnet that only Mama Bisi was allowed to update. The magnet said things like Singapore, 6 days, and Lagos, meetings only. In the 3 months after Amara arrived, Tunde Adebayo was in the estate for a total of 11 days. Amara saw him exactly once in the hallway near the library, where he nodded at her without seeing her, and once through the kitchen window, where he sat alone at the pool at 11 at night, drinking water and looking at his phone. She thought both times the same thing. Rich men look tired, the same way poor men look tired, just in better shirts. Life in the estate settled. Amara mopped the marble in the ballroom every morning before 6. She dusted the bookshelves in the library on Mondays and Thursdays. She learned that Mr. Adebayo's mother's photograph in the main sitting room needed to be turned slightly to the left every 3 days because the housekeeper before Amara had turned it slightly to the right every 3 days, and no one had ever corrected her. She learned that Mama Bisi cried quietly on the anniversary of her son's death, which was August the 9th, and that on that day Mama Bisi wanted to be left alone in the pantry from 3 to 4 in the afternoon and did not want questions afterwards. Amara kept 2 things private. The first was her mother. Mrs. Ankoli Okafor lived in Ajgunle, in a 2-room flat above a barber's shop, in a bed she had not left properly since the morning of Valentine's Day 2 years ago. She could speak a little. Her left hand worked. Her right hand did not. She was cared for during the day by Amara's aunt Chinwe, who was old and kind, and could not be paid what she was worth. Amara sent home 60,000 naira from her salary every month, kept 25,000 for herself. The rest went to medical. The stroke had left a debt of 4 million, 700,000 naira at the private hospital in Surulere, and although Amara had negotiated it down to a monthly installment plan, the mathematics of paying it off on a housekeeper's salary was the kind of mathematics you did not check because the answer would make you sit down on the floor. The second private thing was the bar. Along the east wall of Amara's small room, at the height of her hip, she had screwed a length of smooth polished dowel into the wall using 2 brackets she had bought at Balogun Market for 1,200 naira. It looked, to anyone glancing in, like a decorative rail for hanging scarves. It was, in fact, a ballet bar. Every night after her shift ended and Mama Bisi had gone home to her own daughter in Ilupeju, Amara closed her door, turned off the ceiling fan so its clicking would not distract her, and worked at the bar for 1 hour. Pliés in first, second, and fifth position. 10 douce. Rond de jambe, adagio at the bar. She worked with the discipline of somebody who had, at 19, been the best in her cohort at the National Troupe of Nigeria Academy in Abuja, and who had left 3 months before graduation because her mother had collapsed on the kitchen floor and there was no one else to go home to. She did not dance for anyone. She did not dance for pleasure. She danced because a body that has been trained for 6,000 hours by the age of 22 does not forget how to move. And if you stop moving, the body starts to grieve, and the grief is loud even in a small room. So she moved, quietly, in the dark, above a garage in Ikoyi, for no one at all. For 2 years and 11 months, no one in the Adebayo estate knew. Then, on the evening of the 3rd of April, a woman named Funk Balagun came to live in the house full time, and the mathematics of Amara's life changed in a way no one had prepared her for. Funke Balagun was 34 years old. She was, by any measure that matters in the society pages of this day, and Belanaja, a considerable catch. Her father was a former minister of state. Her mother sat on the board of 2 banks. She had been educated at Cheltenham Ladies' College in England, then at the Rambert School of Ballet in London. She had trained there from 2010 to 2012 as a scholarship student until the school director had sat her down at the end of her 2nd year and said, kindly, but without ambiguity, that the Royal Ballet's professional stream was not going to be the path for her, and that she should consider directing her considerable intelligence towards fields where she would not be measured against people who could turn better than her. She had returned to Lagos, married a banker at 26, divorced him at 30 for reasons the papers described as irreconcilable temperament, and was now engaged to Mr. Tunde Adebayo, whose wealth was, in the polite phrasing of society, generational. The engagement had been announced in October. The wedding was set for the 15th of December. She moved into the estate on the 3rd of April. She met Amara in the corridor outside the library at 11:10 on her first morning. Amara was carrying a tray of dusting cloths. Funke was carrying nothing except a phone, and the expression of a woman who has never in her life had to open a door for herself. She stopped in the middle of the corridor. She looked at Amara from her hairnet down to her shoes. She looked at her for 4 full seconds without speaking, which is a very long time to be looked at in silence in a corridor. Then she said, Said, isn't it? Amara, ma. Amara, Funke repeated, as if trying the word on and finding it did not fit. Yes, Amara, I'll try to remember. She did not try to remember. For the first 6 weeks, she called Amara Sade in the mornings, Bola in the afternoons, and on one particularly bright evening when a friend was over for gin and tonics, the one who mops. Amara answered to all of them. Mama Bisi noticed. Mama Bisi did not say anything, because Mama Bisi had also been called by wrong names for 19 years, and had decided at some point that the correct response to being renamed was to keep the name your mother gave you alive in your own head, and let the other names die when nobody was using them. The cruelty escalated the way water rises in a leaking basement. Slowly, silently, in ways that were only noticeable when your feet were already cold. Week 2. Funke asked Amara to iron a silk kimono, then complained that the crease was in the wrong place, and demanded that Amara stand in the corner of the dressing room for 20 minutes, to think about attention to detail. Amara stood in the corner for 20 minutes. She thought about nothing in particular. Mostly she thought about her mother's morning medication schedule, and whether Aunt Chinwei had remembered to give the amlodipine before the metformin, because giving them in the wrong order made her mother nauseous. Week 5. Funke deliberately spilled a glass of red wine on the ballroom floor at midnight, just before she went to bed, so that when Amara arrived at 5:40 the next morning, she would have to scrub it with vinegar before the stain set. Amara scrubbed it out in 35 minutes. Her knuckles smelled of vinegar for the rest of the day. She did not mention it. Week 8. At a small dinner party for 3 of Funke's friends, Funke turned to one of them mid-conversation, gestured with her chin at Amara, and said, loudly enough that Amara could hear from the sideboard where she was refilling water. You people from the mainland, you carry the smell of generator smoke like perfume. Even after 2 showers, it doesn't leave. It's the diet. Too much palm oil, too much suffering. It gets into the skin. The 3 friends laughed. 2 of them looked at their plates. One of them, a woman named Ronke Ibe, looked at Amara for a moment and did not laugh, and Amara, without ever meeting her eye, understood that she had one witness in this house who was not Mama Bisi. Week 11. Funke fired the gardener, a young man from Ibadan called Sola, because he had watered her hibiscus at the wrong time of day, and, when she had shouted at him about it, had said, "Sorry, Ma," without kneeling. Funke told Mama Bisi she wanted him replaced by someone who understands his level. Week 15. Funke walked into Amara's room above the garage. This was a violation. The staff quarters were, by long tradition in Nigerian domestic households, private in a way even the master of the house respected. Mr. Tunde Adebayo had, in 3 years, never once climbed the stairs above the garage. Mama Bisi kept a copy of the key and used it only for maintenance emergencies. Funke had asked Mama Bisi for the key, been refused, taken it from the pantry without permission, and walked in on a Sunday afternoon while Amara was at her aunt's flat in Ajegunle visiting her mother. Funke looked around the small room for a long time. She saw the sagging bed. She saw the cracked mirror. She saw, along the east wall, the smooth, polished dowel screwed into the brackets. She did not know what it was. She thought it was a scarf rail. She left the room, unimpressed, and returned to the main house. Amara came back that evening, changed out of her going-out clothes into her uniform, and knew immediately that someone had been in the room. She did not know how she knew. Something about the position of the mirror, perhaps, or the fact that the drawer with her savings envelope was closed a millimeter too tight, in the way a drawer is closed, by someone who is being careful not to be noticed, rather than by someone who lives there. She checked the envelope. The money was untouched. She sat on the bed for a moment. Then she stood, closed the door, and worked at the bar for an hour and 45 minutes instead of her usual one. She worked pliés until her thighs shook. She worked adagio combinations until her breath was thin. She did not think about Funke. She thought about the woman she had been at 19 San, the girl in a black leotard at the Abuja Academy, who had won the 3rd-year Adagio prize with a variation from Giselle, and who had believed, on the day of the prize-giving, that her life was moving on rails towards a stage in a real theatre. Then she thought about her mother in the flat in Ajegunle, and about the fact that a life on rails is a beautiful thing until the rails end. She went to bed at 11. She was up at 5:40 the next morning. Meanwhile, in a study on the 2nd floor of the main house, Mr. Tunde Adebayo sat at his desk with a barrister named Ademola Coker and a manila folder of amended prenuptial documents. Barrister Coker was a careful man. He had been the Adebayo family's legal counsel for 13 years. He had drawn up prenuptial agreements before, and he knew that the interesting clauses were never the financial ones was standard, but the ones people added at the last minute, in their own handwriting, on the second draft. Tunde had added 3 clauses to the second draft. Coca had noticed all 3. He mentioned none of them out loud. 2 of the 3 related to conduct. One of them, the third, related specifically to the treatment of household staff. Tunde had signed the second draft on the 11th of June. Funke had not yet been shown it. "You will need to have this conversation with her before the wedding," Coca said carefully. "Ideally before the invitations go out." "I know," Tunde said. "May I ask what has prompted this timing?" "Sir?" Tunde looked out of the study window for a moment, at the garden below, where a new gardener was pruning a hibiscus with the precision of a man who was afraid of losing another job. Tunde had that morning walked past Mama Bisi in the corridor and asked her in Yoruba how the house was. Mama Bisi had said in Yoruba, "The house is well, sir." Then she had paused and added, in the neutral tone she used when she was passing information she was not officially passing, "The new madam is settling in her own way." Mama Bisi had not said anything else. She had not needed to. "Something like that," Tunde said to Coca. "I understand," said Coca, who did. They filed the second draft in the safe. Tunde did not tell Funke about it. He did not tell her, either, that he had known within 6 weeks of moving her into the estate that he had made a mistake, and that the wedding was, in his private mind, already a matter to be resolved rather than a matter to be celebrated. He was, however, a Nigerian man from a certain generation of Adebayos, and men from that generation do not end engagements over feelings. They end engagements over evidence. He was waiting for evidence. The engagement party was scheduled for the 22nd of October at the estate at 7 in the evening for 40 guests. Amara was going to serve at that party. The morning of the 22nd of October began, for Amara, at 5:40, as every morning did. She mopped the ballroom floor. She scrubbed a spot near the third pillar where a wine glass had shattered the night before. Funke had dropped it after her third gin, and had left it there for the morning shift to deal with. Amara's knuckles smelled faintly of vinegar. She did not know at 5:40 on the morning of the 22nd of October that by 11:10 that same night, that same spot on the floor would be photographed by 31 different phones and posted to the internet before midnight. The house was in a state of controlled panic all day. Caterers arrived from Victoria Island at 10. A florist from Lekki arrived at 11 with 3 vans of white peonies and 1 van of imported hydrangeas. A string quartet from the University of Lagos Music Department arrived at 3 to rehearse. Funke supervised everything from a chaise longue in the drawing room, wearing sunglasses indoors, sipping cucumber water, and correcting the placement of napkins by pointing at them with a finger and saying no until somebody moved them. At 6 in the evening, Amara went upstairs to her room, washed, changed into the black serving uniform, tied her hair back neatly, and came down at 6:30 to receive her instructions from Mama Bisi. She was assigned to floor service, carrying trays of champagne and small cold canapes, staying near the walls, refilling glasses when they were 3/4 empty. Mama Bisi looked at her briefly and said, in Yoruba, "Stay near the pillars tonight. And whatever happens, remember, you are a witness in this room, not a subject." Amara nodded. She did not fully understand what Mama Bisi meant. She would 4 hours later. The guests began arriving at 7. They came in dark cars with tinted windows, Range Rovers, Mercedes G-Wagons, one Rolls-Royce whose driver Amara recognized from a magazine cover. The guests themselves were the usual mixture. 3 business partners from Adebayo Holdings, a state senator, two socialites from the Ikoyi Club, a fashion designer who had once dressed Funke's mother for a wedding in Dubai, and a handful of what Mama Bisi called content people, younger men and women in expensive linen with phones held at eye level, filming the entrance for platforms Mama Bisi did not have on her phone and did not intend to. Tunde arrived at 7:40. He had come straight from a meeting in Victoria Island. He wore a dark grey suit and a plain white shirt, no tie, and shook hands with each guest with the same steady, unhurried grip. He kissed Funke on the cheek once, in a way that a very careful observer might have called correct rather than warm. He spent the first hour of the party at the bar, in conversation with one of his business partners, a man named Chik Ibe, who was in the middle of a story about an oil rig in Rivers State that Tunde was listening to with the exact expression of a man who is politely present but internally elsewhere. Amara moved through the ballroom carrying trays. She did not make eye contact with the guests. This was standard training. Her uniform was clean. Her posture was straight. She was, to most of the room, invisible. She was not, however, invisible to Ronke Ibe, Chaikai's wife, who watched her from the sideboard and remembered the dinner party 3 months ago, and the joke about generator smoke, and the moment Amara had refilled her water without comment, when everyone else at the table had been laughing. By 9, Funke was drunk. Not visibly at first, she was a practiced woman, and her heels had not yet begun to betray her, but her voice had climbed half an octave, and the string quartet, which had been playing quietly through dinner, was now competing with her for airspace and losing. She held court in the center of the room, telling a story about a summer in Positano that everyone had heard before, and the guests laughed in the correct places, because that was the price of admission. At 9:15, she looked across the room and saw Amara refilling a champagne flute for the state senator's wife. Something in Funke's face shifted. Not a shift you could describe. It was the shift that comes over the face of a certain kind of person when they see somebody working quietly and correctly and find, in the sight of it, a small, unaccountable itch of resentment. She turned back to her guests. She waited a beat. Then she said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have an idea." The room, obediently, hushed. "Tonight is a celebration," Funke said. Her voice carried. "And I think we've had enough of standing about. Let's have a little entertainment. Something spontaneous. A murmur. A few phones lifted. "There is," Funke said, "in this room tonight, someone who has served us all evening without complaint. Someone we haven't really seen. And I think that's a shame, because tonight I want everyone to be seen." So, she reached into her small silver clutch bag. She pulled out a bundle of Naira notes, thick and neat, held together with a silver clip. 3 million Naira. Cash. For anyone brave enough to dance for us right now. One song. That is all. She fanned the notes. She smiled. Her eyes traveled slowly across the room until they landed on Amara, who was standing near the third pillar with an empty tray in her hands. "Amara," Funke said. And this was the first time in 6 months she had called her by her actual name. "Amara, what do you say? Would you like to earn this?" The room did the thing rooms do when something wrong is happening, but nobody is willing to be the first to say so. It went silent, but not still. Phones lifted higher. The state senator's wife looked at her plate. Ronke Ibe put down her glass slowly and did not pick it up again. Chike Ibe, mid-sentence with Tunde, stopped speaking, and Tunde looked up from his drink, for the first time in an hour, and turned his head towards the center of the room. Amara set her tray on the sideboard. She looked at Funke. She looked at the notes. She looked briefly at the third pillar where she had scrubbed the wine stain that morning. Then she looked past all of them at Mama Bisi, who was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, with her hands folded in front of her apron. Mama Bisi did not move. Mama Bisi held Amara's gaze for one long second, and in that second she said with her face, very clearly, "You are a witness in this room, not a subject." Amara turned back to Funke. "I will dance," she said, "but I do not want your money." A murmur ran through the room. Funke's smile did not move, but a small muscle in her jaw did. "How noble," she said. "How noble of you. But the money stays where it is. Otherwise, what's the point of the game?" "There is no game, Ma," Amara said. Her voice was quiet, level, the voice of a woman who had already made a private decision. "I will dance, that is all." She turned to the quartet. "Please play the Adagio for Strings, by Samuel Barber. I know it is not what you rehearsed. If you do not know it, play the second movement of anything slow." The lead violinist blinked. He was a young man of 23 from Bariga, a music student. He looked at his three colleagues. He looked back at Amara. He said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "We know the barber." Amara nodded. She walked to the center of the ballroom floor. She walked past Funke, past the notes on the floor, past the state senator, past Ronke Ibe. She stopped in the space where the light from the three chandeliers converged. She turned to face the far wall. She took off her serving apron, folded it once, and set it neatly on the arm of a nearby chair. Underneath, she wore the plain black uniform trousers and blouse of the household staff. She stood in fifth position, her feet, turning out with a precision so automatic that two of the guests who had trained in ballet, as girls recognized the placement instantly, and one of them, sitting on a low couch, quietly said, "Oh." She raised her arms into a preparatory port de bras. The quartet began. The Adagio for Strings opens with a single long note in the violins, held, sustained. A note that does not begin so much as continue, as if the sound had been there the whole evening, and everyone had only just noticed it. Amara began to move on that first note, not with a large gesture, with her breath, and then with her hands, and then, slowly, with a step onto the ball of her right foot, into an arabesque that unfolded not from the shoulder, but from the base of the spine. The room understood in the first 8 bars. It was not the understanding of experts. Most of the people in that ballroom did not know what a Vaganova line was, or why the placement of the head at the top of an attitude devant matters, or why the transition from Adagio to the small preparatory step for a fouette sequence should be almost invisible if the training has been correct. They understood instead the way a person in a market understands when someone has been carrying water on their head since they were a child. The way the neck sits, the way the shoulders release, the way the body does with grace what other bodies do with effort. Amara was not performing. She was doing what her body had been trained to do for 6,000 hours before she was 22, and what she had continued to do in a small room above a garage for 6,000 hours more since. She turned, she extended, she held. Funke, who had trained at the Rambert School of Ballet in London from 2010 to 2012, and had been told, gently, that she was not going to be a professional, saw the third combination and knew exactly what she was looking at. She knew the Vaganova preparation. She knew the point of the foot. She knew, in a way that hit her below the sternum, that the woman she had been calling Sade for 6 months was the kind of dancer that Funke, at 19, had cried in her dormitory in London for not being able to become. Her smile faltered. She lowered her arms. She began, without knowing it, to step backwards. The music climbed. The Adagio does not so much build as swell, it rises in slow arcs. And each arc is higher than the last, and each demands more of the dancer's stamina, and Amara met each rise. Her arms carried the music, Her back carried her whole life. She did a slow attitude derrière. She did a controlled développé to second, extending her leg to the height of her ear, and held it, and lowered it, as slowly as a woman, lowering a sleeping baby back into a cot. Somewhere in the back of the room, Ronka-Ibe was crying. Silently. Not the theatrical crying of society women at a wedding. The kind of crying you do when you realize, in the middle of an ordinary evening, that you have been complicit in something small and cruel that you did not have the courage to name at the time. Chik-Ibe raised his phone. Not to mock, to record. He did not know at that moment why he was recording. He would understand 3 days later, when he sat with his laptop at 3 in the morning and posted the clip to LinkedIn under the caption, "This is what we owe the people who serve us." The music entered its final climb. Amara turned into a slow, sustained pirouette, not the flashy multiple turn of a competition dancer. A single, held, controlled rotation, arms opening, breath even. The pivot foot rooted, the free foot in the exact place. Her old teacher at the Abuja Academy, Professor Ekene Ivu, had drilled into her 1,000 times. Sur le coup de pied, not too high, not too low. The ankle bone visible. She landed the turn. She held. The adagio at its final bar does not end. It fades. The strings dissolve into a long, slow diminuendo, a sound the ear does not want to release. Amara held her final position. One arm extended, the other folded at her heart, her head slightly tilted, her weight resting on the ball of her right foot. For the last 4 counts of the fade. And then, as the last note vanished, she brought her feet together, folded her arms into a small closing bow, and stood, breathing, in the exact center of the ballroom. 4 minutes and 11 seconds after she had begun. The room did not applaud. The room did not know how, and that was the moment Tunde Adebayo, who had been standing near the bar with a glass of water in his hand for the entire duration of the piece, and had not moved once, set the glass down on the nearest surface, walked slowly across the ballroom, and stopped 6 feet away from Amara. He said her name, Amara Okafor. She looked up. She did not know how he knew her surname. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, "I signed a scholarship for a young woman by that name. Application number 2019-047. Full fellowship. The National Troupe of Nigeria Academy in Abuja." She did not take up her final year. Amara's mouth opened, then closed. "That was me, sir," she said. Tunde nodded, slowly. Then he turned towards Funke. Then he turned back to Amara. Then he said, in a voice that carried across the entire silent room, "I owe you an apology, and I owe every person in this room an explanation. Please, if you will, give me 1 moment." Tunde did not raise his voice. He did not need to. When a man of his kind of quiet stands in the center of a room he owns and speaks, the room recalibrates around the sound. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said. He looked at the state senator. He looked at Chik-Ibe. He looked at each of the 3 business partners in turn. "This engagement party is now over. The catering staff will bring your coats. Drivers have been called. Please travel safely. There is no cause for alarm. There has, however, been a serious lapse in the conduct of this house tonight, and I do not intend to correct it in front of you. Good night." The room began to move. Slowly, then quickly. The socialites gathered their clutches. The state senator gathered his wife. Chik-Ibe put a hand on his wife's back and steered her towards the door. He glanced once at Tunde. Tunde inclined his head very slightly. Nothing more was needed. Chike understood. Within 11 minutes, the ballroom was empty of guests. The staff remained. So did Funke, who had not moved from where she was standing at the edge of the room, near the empty chair where Amara had folded her apron. Mama Bisi came forward. She did not speak. She simply walked over to Amara, put a hand on the small of her back, and steered her towards the kitchen. Amara went. She left the folded apron on the chair. She did not look at Fiancée. She did not look at Tunde. She walked out of the ballroom with the same steadiness she had walked in with, and the moment she was through the kitchen door, Mama Bisi closed it behind them and said, in Yoruba, "Sit down, my daughter. Drink water. The night is not finished yet, but for you it is." Amara sat down at the kitchen table. Her hands were shaking. She had not noticed until she tried to lift the glass. In the ballroom, Tunde and Fiancée were alone. Fiancée recovered first. She always did. She was the daughter of a former minister, and she had been raised to believe that the correct response to a difficult moment was to take control of the narrative before the other person could. "Tunde," she said, "before you say anything that was inappropriate of me, I admit it. I had too much to drink. The girl is talented. I did not know. I will apologize to her tomorrow. In writing, if you want." Tunde looked at her for a long time. "Funk," he said. "In 3 months, you have called that woman by the wrong name 411 times. Mama Bisi has been counting. She keeps a small notebook. She showed it to me last week." Funke's face did not move, but a small color rose in her neck. "You spilled a glass of wine on the ballroom floor at midnight on the 11th of July, so that she would have to clean it at 5 in the morning. You entered her private room without permission on the 14th of July. You made a remark about generator smoke in front of 3 guests, which was reported back to me by 2 of them, independently. You dismissed a gardener because he did not kneel when he apologized. And tonight, you offered a woman who works in my house 3 million naira to entertain your friends. In my ballroom, in front of 40 people, with phones raised." He paused. "I have known about all of this," he said, "for some time. I have been waiting to see whether it would stop of its own accord. It did not." Funke's mouth moved. She did not speak. Tunde walked to the sideboard. He opened the small locked cabinet where he kept the household documents. He took out a manila folder. He set it on the sideboard. "This is the second draft of our prenuptial agreement," he said. "It was completed by Barrister Ademola Coker on the 11th of June. It contains 3 clauses that are not standard. One of them concerns the treatment of household staff. Specifically, it stipulates that any documented pattern of abusive conduct towards persons in domestic service, by either party, before or during the marriage, is grounds for the immediate termination of the engagement, or, after the marriage, the initiation of divorce proceedings on the terms specified in Section 11. He tapped the folder. "You have never seen this draft. That was my fault. I should have shown it to you in June. I wanted, I think, to give you a chance to demonstrate that the clause would not be necessary. You have demonstrated the opposite." Funke found her voice. "You are ending our engagement," she said. "Because I was rude to a maid." "No," Tunde said. "I am ending our engagement because I am marrying the person you are, not the person you present in company. And the person you are treats human beings like set dressing when she believes no one important is looking. That is not a person I want to raise children with. That is not a person I want in this house. And frankly, Funke, that is not a person I want to grow old sharing a bed with." She stared at him. "You cannot do this," she said. "Not as a threat, as a plea. The invitations have gone out. The papers have printed the date. Do you know what my mother will say? I have already called your mother," Tunde said. "This afternoon, I told her I was concerned. She told me that in her opinion I was overreacting. That was the last conversation I intend to have with your family on this subject." Funke's face did something complicated. Anger. First. Then something colder. Then something smaller and older that Tunde had never seen on it before, which was fear. "Where am I supposed to go tonight?" she said. "Your car is at the front gate," said Tunde. "Your driver has been informed. Your things will be sent to your parents' house on Bordeyon Road tomorrow, packed by the staff with a full inventory. I will not permit anyone to take anything of yours or lose anything of yours. That is a promise." He looked at her for a long moment. "I am sorry, Funke," he said. "I do not enjoy this. I am not doing it to punish you. I am doing it because there is no version of this marriage that ends well for either of us. You will understand that in time. Not tonight, but in time." Funke did not cry. She was, as I have said, a practiced woman. She picked up her clutch bag from the sideboard. She did not pick up the 3 million naira. She walked out of the ballroom with her heels, striking the marble in the same rhythm she had walked in with 6 months ago, and the front doors of the estate closed behind her at 11:24 that night. The money stayed on the floor until morning. At 6 the next morning, Mama Bisi counted it, banded it, and locked it in the household safe. Nobody touched it after that for 8 days. Amara slept in her small room above the garage that night with the door locked. She did not practice at the bar. She lay on her back, on the sagging mattress, and looked at the ceiling fan, which she had left off, and she listened to the compound outside settling into silence. She did not know what she was supposed to feel. She thought mostly of her mother. She thought, "We have almost paid off the hospital. 2 more years of installments. 2 more years, and we will be free of Surulere General." She did not know that at the same moment, in an apartment in Ikeja, Chike Ibe was sitting at his laptop with his wife Ronke beside him, uploading a 2-minute and 19-second clip of a woman in a black serving uniform performing an adagio for strings on a marble ballroom floor with the caption, "This is what we owe the people who serve us," and 3 lines below, "If anyone knows who this young woman is, please help me find her. She deserves the world." The clip was posted to LinkedIn at 11:52 at night on the 22nd of October. By 4 in the morning, it had 11,000 views. By 9 that morning, it had 140,000. At 9:30 that morning, in an office at the National Troupe of Nigeria Academy in Abuja, Professor Ekine Ivu opened LinkedIn on his phone, which he only did once a week and always reluctantly, and saw the clip on his feed. He watched it once. He watched it a second time. He set the phone down on his desk. He did not move for several minutes. Then he picked up the phone and called the Academy's director, a woman named Dr. Halima Bello, who was in her office 2 doors down, and said in a voice he could barely control, "Halima, come and see this. It is Amara Okafor. She is alive. She is dancing. And whoever this is has just posted her to the internet." Dr. Bello came into his office within 90 seconds. She watched the clip. She watched it a second time. She watched it a third. "Where was this filmed?" she asked. "Ikoyi," said Professor Ikane. "The Adebayo estate. The Adebayo of Adebayo Holdings? The same." Dr. Bello sat down slowly. "Ekine," she said, "we lost her 3 months before graduation." "I know," said Professor Ekine. "I remember. She was the best in her cohort. I remember that too." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Dr. Bello said, "Call her. Today. Find her. Tell her the Academy has an audition slot next Monday. Not a scholarship. She will not accept a scholarship. She is not that kind of girl. Tell her it is an open audition. Tell her the panel will not know her name until after she has finished. Tell her we would like her to come." Professor Ikine nodded. He called Adebayo Holdings' main line. He asked for the CEO's assistant. He explained who he was. The assistant, a young woman named Grace, took a message and said, "Precisely. I will pass this to Mr. Adebayo. Please expect a call back within the hour." The callback came in 41 minutes. It was not Tunde. It was Mama Bisi. She had been given the phone by Tunde and told to conduct the conversation herself. She asked Professor Akin 3 questions. What year had Amara studied? What had been her best variation? What was the name of the teacher who had drilled her placement for the Sur le coup de pied preparation? Professor Akin answered all 3. Mama Bisi listened. Then she said quietly, "Come to Lagos, Professor. Come and speak to her yourself. I will not put her on the phone. She has had a long night, but you should see her. In person." Professor Akin took the 11 a.m. Air Peace flight from Abuja to Lagos. Amara was told about the meeting at 4 that afternoon. She was told by Mama Bisi in the kitchen, over a cup of Bournvita. Amara sat with the cup in her hands for a long time. She did not drink from it. Mama Bisi did not speak. Mama Bisi had learned, over 19 years, that the correct thing to do when somebody was receiving good news that was arriving 3 years too late was to sit in silence and let them arrive at it on their own time. Finally, Amara said, "Ma, my mother. Your mother will be brought to Lagos this weekend," Mama Bisi said. "Mr. Adebayo has already arranged it. A private ambulance from Ajagunle. A room in a clinic in Ikoyi. 2 months, minimum, to see if her therapy improves with better care. He is paying for it. He does not want to be thanked for it. He has asked me to tell you that specifically. It is not a favor. It is a repair. He will not accept the framing of a favor." Amara set the Bournvita cup down. She did not cry. She had made a decision 3 years ago, on a danfo from Iyana Iba, that she would not cry for anything that was already decided. She looked at Mama Bisi. Mama Bisi looked back at her. Neither of them said anything for a very long time. Then Amara said, "Ma, I would like to go up to my room now." "Go," said Mama Bisi. "The professor is not coming until tomorrow morning at 8. You have tonight." Amara went up the stairs above the garage. She closed the door. She turned off the fan. She stood for a long time at the bar. She did not move. She did not do pliés. She did not do tendus. She rested her hand on the smooth, polished dowel that she had screwed into the wall 3 years ago, with a pair of brackets from Balagun Market. She rested her hand there. She breathed. Then she began to work. The audition on the Monday happened as planned. Amara arrived at the temporary Lagos audition space, a rehearsal room the academy had rented at the Muson Center on Onikan, at 9 in the morning, wearing a plain black leotard and pink tights. She had bought that Saturday at a dance supplier in Surulere with money. Mama Bisi had insisted on advancing her from her own pocket. She had done her hair in a low bun. She had eaten a small breakfast. She had not slept well, but she had slept enough. The panel consisted of 5 people: Dr. Halima Bello, Professor Ekini Iwu, 2 visiting adjudicators from the National Troupe, a visiting instructor from the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theatre who had happened to be in Lagos that week for a workshop and had agreed to sit in as an external ear. Amara did not know their names. She had asked not to know. She was to be introduced only by her audition number, which was 142. She danced 3 pieces. A required classical variation, the Giselle Act 2 solo, a modern piece of her own choreographing, 3 minutes long, set to a Nina Simone recording of Ne Me Quitte Pas, a cold red, sight unseen. The panel showed her a 2-minute choreographic phrase on video and gave her 20 minutes to learn it and perform it. She was in the room for 1 hour and 40 minutes. She was not told the result at the end. That was standard. She thanked the panel. She left the room. She walked out onto Onikan, into the ordinary noise of a Lagos Monday. The danfo horns, the roadside barbers, the woman selling boiled corn from a tray on her head, and she took a bolt back to Ikoyi. And she went to work. The result came on the Thursday, in a plain white envelope, delivered by DHL. She had been accepted. Full fourth-year admission. Class beginning in January. No fees. The academy waived them on the grounds of exceptional readmission, but no scholarship either. She had insisted, through Professor Ekene, that no financial patronage from the Adebayo family be part of the arrangement. Tunde had accepted her condition without argument. He understood it. He respected it. Her mother's condition improved slowly over the 2 months of clinical care in Ikoyi. Not miraculously. There were no miracles. There was, however, physiotherapy of a standard that Ajegunle did not have, and a speech therapist who could give 3 sessions a week instead of 1, and a nurse who could come daily instead of Amara's Aunt Chinwe, who had done her best on a schedule that was cruel to both of them. By the middle of December, Mrs. Nenkoli Okafor could hold a cup of Bornvita in her right hand for the first time in almost 3 years. She held it for 11 seconds before she needed to put it down. Amara, watching, sat very still and did not do the thing she wanted to do, which was to make a sound. Funke Balogun's story ended more quietly than the internet expected. The LinkedIn clip did not, in fact, go viral in the way people mean when they use that phrase. It reached a specific audience, the Nigerian professional class, business leaders, the arts community, and the diaspora. It was viewed 480,000 times over 4 weeks. Chike Ibe removed the caption asking to identify the dancer after Amara privately requested he do so. He did not take down the clip. He was asked by 2 publications for the story behind it and declined to give it. Funke's family did not release a statement. They did not need to. Society knew. Her mother's board seat at the second bank was, 3 months later, not renewed. Her father made no public comment. The wedding invitations were quietly withdrawn by the invitation printer, who was paid the balance of his fee for silence. Funke went to London for 2 months to stay with a cousin. She came back thinner. She spoke to no journalists. 2 things did happen to her. The first, she was formally removed from the board of the Balogun Family Foundation, which her parents controlled and which funded literacy programs for domestic workers in Lagos. Her removal was not announced. It appeared in the following year's annual report in the section listing board changes under the neutral phrasing, position vacated by mutual agreement. The second, she agreed under a private arrangement negotiated between her father and Tunde's family to complete 200 hours of documented service at that same foundation, working directly with the literacy program's participants, housekeepers, cleaners, cooks, nannies, women mostly, women like the ones she had been rude to for the previous 15 years. She did the 200 hours. She kept her mouth shut for most of them. On the last day, according to a supervisor who spoke to no journalist and whose account survived only in a Balogun family email chain, Funke sat down at the end of a Thursday afternoon class and cried for 20 minutes in a locked stall in the ladies' bathroom. What she cried about, if she cried about anything specifically, is not for me to say. I will say only this. A woman named Halima Musa, 49 years old, from Nasarawa State, who had been enrolled in the Foundation's literacy program for 11 months, wrote in her final assessment portfolio under the heading, "What I have learned this year," a sentence that was later included, without her name, in the Foundation's public annual report. The sentence was, "The rich are afraid of us in a way we did not know before. They are afraid we will one day see them clearly. This year, one of them saw us first, and she cried about it." I do not know if that sentence was written about Funke Balogun. I do not know if Halima Musa ever knew who Funke was. I include the sentence because sometimes the smallest sentence, written by the person you thought was invisible, is the whole story. Tunde Adebayo did not marry anyone else for a long time. He returned to his rhythm. Singapore, 6 days. Lagos, meetings only. He turned his mother's photograph in the sitting room slightly to the left every 3 days himself. After Amara left for Abuja in January, because the new housekeeper turned it to the right, and he preferred to correct it in silence rather than embarrass her. He kept the bar in Amara's old room above the garage, exactly where it was. He said, when Mama Bisi asked if it should be removed, that it should not be removed, that the room should be left as it was, just in case. Mama Bisi asked no follow-up question, because she had learned, over 19 years, when a man was leaving a door open in his own house. Amara went to Abuja on the 7th of January. She danced her final year at the academy. She graduated in the July of the year after that, at the age of 29. She joined the national troupe. She has since then danced principal roles in 3 productions. She has toured once to Cape Town. She sends money home to her mother every month by direct transfer. Aunt Chinwe still visits 3 times a week. Mrs. Nkoli Okafor cannot yet walk, but she can, on good days, use her right hand to write short sentences on a notepad. One of the sentences she wrote, on the first Sunday of last month, and which her sister Chinwe photographed and sent to Amara by WhatsApp, read simply, "My daughter danced." That is where I want to leave this story. Almost. Before I do, because I owe you the honesty of it, I want to say the small thing that I always think about when I tell a story like this one, and which is the reason I tell them at all. I have spent a long time now writing about people who serve in other people's houses. I've read the reports. I've read the numbers. There are, in Nigeria alone, an estimated 1.5 million women and men in domestic service. Most of them are underpaid. A great many of them are unseen. And a percentage of them, nobody knows how large, because nobody has ever bothered to count, are working in those houses, not because they were born to it, but because life bent them off the road they were meant to be on. They were teachers. They were students. They were dancers. They were engineers. They were, before the illness in the family or the failed harvest or the exam fee they could not pay, something else. You may have met one of them and not known. That is the part that stays with me. Not the dramatic moment in the ballroom. The other part. The part where a woman with the training of a principal dancer sweeps your marble floor every morning at 5:40, and you never think to ask her name correctly. The part where the man who washes your car had a place at engineering school in Nsukka that he had to give up in his 2nd year. The part where the woman who takes care of your children could tell you, if you asked, the names of every capital city in Africa in alphabetical order, because she used to be the one at the front of a classroom asking the same question. You do not need to know all of it. You do not need to save them, either. That is not what any of this is about. What it is about is much smaller than that. Get the name right. Say it correctly. Say it the 2nd time you say it, and the 3rd, and the 10,000th. Do not raise your voice at somebody who cannot raise theirs back. Do not offer money to somebody in front of a crowd. Do not spill wine at midnight because you know who will scrub it in the morning. That is all. Get the name right. The rest, believe me, tends to take care of itself. Amara Okafor is dancing tonight, somewhere in a rehearsal studio in Abuja that is too hot in July and too cold in December. The bar in the small room above the garage in Ikoyi is still on the east wall, where she screwed it in 3 years, before anyone in that house knew who she was. If you have watched this far, thank you. And if you know an Amara, call her by her name. The rice was cold. It had been sitting on that plate for 3 hours, scraped from the edges where the guests had left it, and Zara ate it with her back, pressed against the humming refrigerator. In the dark, because darkness was the only privacy a house girl was allowed in that mansion. She did not hear the front gate. She did not hear the car. She did not know that the man who owned everything around her, the marble under her bare feet, the fridge at her back, the very plate in her trembling hands, had come home 4 hours early and was now standing in the kitchen doorway, watching her eat what his guests had thrown away. Tunde Okafor did not move. This man, who signed contracts worth billions, who employed 900 people across 3 states, who had never in his life wondered whether there would be food. This man simply froze. And in the seconds that followed, something inside him that had been asleep for a very long time began, slowly and painfully, to wake up. You were about to watch a truth unravel that a powerful man was never meant to see, the kind of thing that happens in quiet houses behind tall gates, while the owners look the other way. So do not leave halfway. The moment he understands what has been happening under his own roof, everything changes, and you will not want to miss his face when it does. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and what time it is where you sit right now. I want to know who is here with me tonight, and if stories about dignity, quiet courage, and the reckoning that always comes for the wicked move something in you, subscribe now, so the next one finds you. Now, let us go back to how a girl came to be eating in the dark. Zara Nwosu had come to Lagos on a Tuesday, in June, with 1 bag and 200 naira and a phone that could no longer hold a charge for more than an hour. She was 22. Her mother, back in the village near Nsukka, had been placed on dialysis 3 times a week at the teaching hospital, and each session cost money the family did not have. And the sessions did not stop, simply because the money did. That is the thing about a failing kidney. It does not care about your budget. It does not wait for the harvest. It demands and demands, and if you cannot pay, it takes your mother from you slowly, in front of your eyes, while you watch and count the days. So Zara had done what thousands of girls before her had done. She had answered an advertisement. A big house in Ikoki, it said. Live-in domestic help, good pay, accommodation provided. She had knelt in the church that morning and thanked God for the mercy, and she had boarded the bus with hope, sitting in her chest like a warm stone. She did not yet know Bisi. Bisi Adeyemi had run the Okafor household for 12 years. 12 years is a long time. It is long enough to learn where every key hangs, long enough to know which suppliers can be squeezed and which cannot, long enough to understand, better than anyone, that Chief Tunde Okafor was a man who did not look down. He looked up. He looked out. He looked at spreadsheets and shipping manifests and the faces of ministers across boardroom tables. He did not look down at the people who washed his floors, because in his mind that was what Bisi was for. He paid Bisi to look down so that he would never have to. And Bisi had understood this arrangement completely. She had built her whole small kingdom on it. On Zara's first evening, Bisi sat her down in the staff quarters, a narrow row of rooms behind the main house, where the generator noise never fully died, and explained the rules, the way a headmistress explains rules to a girl she has already decided to break. Your salary is 45,000 a month, Bisi said, not looking up from her ledger. But you are new. New ones makes mistakes. Mistakes cost this house money. So for your first 6 months, I will hold your salary here, safely, and give you what you need. This is for your own good. Village girls carry money and lose it, or send it to a boyfriend, or gamble it on those betting shops. I have seen it too many times. You will thank me. Zara opened her mouth to speak. You are not thanking me, Bisi said. Thank you, Ma, Zara said quickly. Better. Now the food in the main kitchen is for the family and their guests. You do not touch it. There is a pot for staff. When it is finished, it is finished. And you do not, under any circumstances, eat what comes back from the dining room. That is not your portion. A housegirl who eats her master's leftovers is a thief who has not yet been caught. Do you understand me? Yes, Ma. Say it back to me. I will not touch the family food. I will not eat what comes back from the table. Good girl. BC finally looked up, and her smile did not reach anywhere near her eyes. You will do very well here, if you know your level. That is the only thing that ever destroys people like you. Forgetting your level. Now go and sleep. You start at 5. That was the beginning. For the first 2 months, Zara managed. The staff pot was thin rice and a watery stew, portioned by BC's own hand, and BC's hand grew meaner as the month went on. But Zara was strong, and she was used to going without, and she told herself it was temporary. She worked. God, how she worked. She was up before the birds and down long after the last light in the main house went dark. She scrubbed floors until her knuckles cracked. She learned the geography of a house so large that on her first week she had gotten lost twice. She ironed shirts that cost more than her mother's entire hospital bill, and she folded them with a care that bordered on prayer. And every 3 days, when her phone had enough charge, she called home, and her aunt would put the phone to her mother's ear, and Zara would say, "Mama, I am fine. Lagos is fine. The people are kind. Do not worry about the money. I am sending it. Everything is arranged." None of it was true. But her mother's voice, thin as thread on the other end, was the only thing keeping Zara upright, and Zara would have told 1,000 lies to keep hearing it. The trouble was the money. Because when the end of the first month came, Zara went to Bissy and, hands folded, eyes down, asked humbly, so humbly if she could send just a small part of her salary home for the dialysis. Bissy looked at her as though she had asked to borrow the moon. Did you not hear me on your first day? Your salary is held for 6 months. Are you deaf or are you stupid? Ma, please, my mother is sick. The hospital, everybody's mother is sick. Bissy did not raise her voice. That was the frightening thing about Bissy. She never needed to. Do you know how many village girls have stood exactly where you are standing and told me exactly that story? Your mother, her mother, that one's grandmother. It is always somebody dying. If I released salary every time one of you cried about a sick relative, this house would be bankrupt, and I would be a fool. I am not a fool. Go back to work. Ma, I am begging you. You want to beg? Now something shifted in Bissy's face, something that had been waiting. Then beg properly, on your knees. Let me see how badly you want it. And Zara, God forgive her, she would think later. God forgive me. Zara knelt. On the cold tile of the staff kitchen, in her uniform, she knelt. Because her mother's life was on a machine 3 times a week, and pride does not pay for dialysis. Bissy watched her kneel for a long moment. Then she laughed softly and said, "Get up. You disgust me. Kneeling like a beggar. Where is your dignity? You people have none. That is why you were born to serve and we were born to be served." She stepped over Zara's bag on her way out. Salary is held. 6 months. Do not ask me again. That was the day. Something in Zara went quiet. Not broken. Quiet. She stopped asking. She started calculating. She counted the days until the 6 months would end. She counted the dialysis sessions her mother would need before then. The numbers did not agree. They did not come close to agreeing. And a girl who is watching numbers refused to agree, while her mother's life hangs on the wrong side of the arithmetic, will begin to do things she swore she would never do. She began to eat the leftovers, not out of greed, out of survival. The staff pot was never enough, and Zara had started saving the tiny amounts of cash Bissy doled out for necessities, hiding it coin by coin, wrapped in a sock inside her mattress, because that sock was the only plan she had for her mother. Every naira she did not spend on food was a naira closer to a dialysis session. So she ate less of the staff food, gave part of even her thin portion to the younger houseboy who was always hungry, and made up the difference at night, in the dark, with the plates that came back from the dining room. She told herself it was not stealing. The food was going in the bin. She was not taking it from anyone's mouth. She was taking it from the rubbish. But Bisi's words lived in her head. A housegirl who eats her master's leftovers is a thief who has not yet been caught. And so she ate in the dark, fast, ashamed, listening always for footsteps. For 11 weeks, no footsteps came. There was a boy on the staff in those weeks, younger than Zara, a houseboy named Chidi, who could not have been more than 19, and who was always hungry. The bottomless hunger of a body still growing on food that was never enough. Zara took to leaving part of her own thin portion where he would find it. She told him it was extra. It was not extra. There was never extra. She simply decided that a growing boy needed it more than she did, and made up her own shortfall in the dark, later, with the plates from the dining room. She never told him where the difference came from. She did not want him carrying the shame she carried. Let one of them, at least, eat in the light. One night, in the 9th week, she nearly stopped. She had a plate in her hands, the remains of a birthday dinner, 40 guests, a mountain of food scraped into the bins, more thrown away in one evening than the staff pot held in a week. And she stood in the dark and thought about her mother on the machine, and thought about Chidi's hollow face, and thought about the sock in her mattress that, after 9 weeks of scrimping, held barely enough for a single dialysis session, and something in her simply gave way. She put the plate down. She did not eat. She sat on the cold floor of the kitchen with her back against the fridge, and she did not cry, because crying was a thing she had trained out of herself. But she sat there in the dark for a long time. And she thought, with a flatness that frightened her more than any grief, I do not think I can do this. I do not think we are going to make it. And then she thought of her mother's voice on the phone. Do not worry about the money. I am fine. Lagos is kind. And she got up, and she picked the plate back up, and she ate. Because giving up was a luxury, and she could not afford it, and she still had one more Tuesday to pay for. That was the 9th week. On the 11th, a flight from Abuja was delayed, and a man came home early and stood in a doorway and froze. Tunde Okafor had built his logistics company from a single second-hand truck. People forgot that about him now that there were 900 employees and a fleet that moved cargo across the whole of the South. But he had not forgotten. He remembered the truck. He remembered the years he had eaten gari and groundnut nut because there was nothing else, and remembered them without bitterness because they had made him. What he had forgotten, what wealth had quietly erased from him, year by comfortable year, was what that hunger looked like on another person's face, until he saw it in his own kitchen. He stood in the doorway and watched the girl. He watched her hunched shoulders, the speed of her eating, the way her eyes darted to the door, even as her hands kept moving. The animal watchfulness of someone who has learned that being caught means punishment. He watched her scrape the last of the cold rice with 2 fingers, because a spoon would have made noise. And Tunde Okafor, who had negotiated with ministers and stared down men who wanted to destroy him, felt his throat close. He must have made a sound. Or perhaps she simply felt him there, the way the hunted feel the hunter. Zara's head came up. For 1 second, neither of them moved. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere far off, the generator turned over, and Zara's face Tunde would remember this face for the rest of his life. Zara's face went from shock to terror to a terrible, crumpling shame, all in the space of a single breath. The plate slipped from her hands and did not break but clattered, loud, obscene, in the enormous silence. "Sir," she was on her feet. She was backing away. "Sir, I'm sorry, sir, Her hands were up, palms out, the universal posture of someone expecting to be struck. Please, sir, please don't. I'll go. I'll pack my things tonight. I'll go. Just please. Don't call the police, sir. I'm not a thief, I swear to God. I'm not a thief. It was going in the bin, sir. I only stop." His voice came out rougher than he intended. She flinched as though he had raised a hand. That flinch did something to him. "Stop." "I am not going to. Nobody is calling the police." "Nobody is." He stopped. He did not know how to talk to her. He realized, with a strange lurch, that he did not even know her name. She had been living under his roof, and he did not know her name. "What is your name?" She was crying now, silently, in the way people cry when they have taught themselves that crying out loud brings worse. "Zara, sir. Zara." He said it carefully. "Zara, how long since you ate today? A proper meal. Today." And here was the thing that finished him. She did not understand the question. She looked at him with genuine confusion, as if he had asked her something in a foreign language, because the concept of a proper meal today had become so distant from her life that she had to reach for it. Then she understood, and the understanding was worse than the confusion. And she looked at the floor and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "The pot finished on Tuesday, sir." Tuesday. It was Thursday. Tunde Okafor put his hand on the cold marble of the kitchen island to steady himself, because the floor of the house he had built with his own 2 hands had just tilted beneath him, and he understood, with a clarity that felt like a blade, going in that he had been living, for years, above a suffering he had paid other people specifically, so that he would never have to see. There was a memory rising in him that he had not touched in 20 years, and he could not stop it. He was 9 years old, in the village, the year the rains failed. His mother had fed him, and his sisters first, always first, and he had been too young to understand why she ate last and ate least, until the night he woke thirsty, and came out to the cooking fire, and found her scraping the empty pot with her fingers, eating what was stuck to the bottom in the dark, thinking her children asleep. She had frozen when she saw him. That same freeze, that same shame on a face that had done nothing to be ashamed of. And 9-year-old Tunde had understood, in a wordless way, that his mother was hungry so that he would not be, and that she had hidden it from him so that he would not carry it. He had promised himself, that night, that when he was a big man, no one under his roof would ever eat in the dark again. He had become a very big man, and he had forgotten the promise so completely that it had taken a stranger's hunger, 30 years later, to dig it back up. The forgetting shamed him more than anything else, not the not knowing, the forgetting. He had once known exactly what this was, from the inside, and wealth had smoothed it out of him like a thumb smoothing wax. "Sit down," he said. His voice was not steady. "Sit down, Zara. Right there. Don't move." He went to the refrigerator himself, this man who had not opened his own refrigerator in a decade. He took out bread and eggs, and leftover jollof that was full and fresh, and portioned for a family that never finished it. And he warmed it, clumsily, badly, and he set it in front of her, and he watched a grown woman look at a plate of hot food, as though it were a trick, as though it would be snatched away, as though kindness itself were a thing she no longer trusted. "Eat," he said quietly. "It's yours. Nobody is going to take it. Eat, my daughter. My daughter." The old address, the intimate one, the one that meant you are a person to me. It broke the last of her control. Zara put her face in her hands and wept, and Tunde Okafor, chief, billionaire, employer of 900 nan, stood in his own kitchen at midnight and did not know what to do with his hands, and felt, rising in him, a shame so total and so overdue that it took everything he had not to weep himself. But he did not weep, not yet. First, he needed to understand. Because a man does not build what Tunde Okafor had built without knowing, in his bones, that what he had just seen was not an accident. It was a symptom, and symptoms have causes, and the cause was somewhere in his house, wearing his trust like a stolen coat, and he was going to find it. Zara, he said, when the worst of her crying had passed, and she was eating, at last, with the desperate focus of the truly hungry. I am going to ask you some questions, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if the truth frightens you, especially if it frightens you. Nobody in this house is going to hurt you. Do you understand? You are safe now. Whatever you tell me, you are safe. She looked up at him, and in her eyes was 12 years of BC's kingdom, and 11 weeks of eating in the dark, and a lifetime of learning that safe was a word rich people used and never meant. You will say that now, sir, she whispered, but in the morning you will forget, and she will still be here. Who, said Tunde Okafor very softly, is she? Her name was BC Adeyemi, and by the time the sun came up on Friday, Tunde Okafor had learned enough to understand that he did not, in fact, know his own house at all. He did not confront BC that morning. This is important, and it is the thing that separated Tunde from a lesser man. A lesser man would have stormed into the staff quarters at dawn, dragged BC out by her collar, and thrown her into the street on the strength of his fury alone. BC, 12 years clever, would have wept and denied and turned it around, and by noon Zara would have been the liar, the ungrateful village girl who insulted a faithful servant, and she would have been gone, and BC would have remained, more powerful than before. Tunde knew this. He had not become who he was by acting on fury. He had become who he was by gathering evidence, and then acting on that, so he said nothing. He rose at his usual time. He greeted BC with his usual nod. He watched her run the house with the smooth, unbothered efficiency of a woman who has never once imagined that the ground could shift beneath her. And he thought, I have seen this before, not here, in business. The supplier whose numbers are always just a little too clean. The manager whose department never has a problem because he is quietly burying every problem. Confidence like that is not innocence. Confidence like that is a person who has been getting away with it for so long that they have stopped being afraid. He called his company accountant that afternoon. Not to the house, to a small office he kept in Victoria Island, away from everything. Dare Okoro had done Tunde's books for 8 years and had the particular gift of the good accountant, which is the ability to look at a river of numbers and see the one drop that is flowing the wrong way. I need you to look at something quietly, Tunde told him. The household accounts. Everything that has gone out for the domestic staff, salaries, feeding, welfare, everything for the last 3 years. I want it reconciled against what the staff have actually received. And I do not want anyone in the house to know you are looking. Dare frowned. You suspect someone. I suspect I have been a fool, said Tunde. Which is worse. Find me the shape of the foolishness. It took Dare 4 days. When he came back, he laid the papers on Tunde's desk with the care of a surgeon laying out instruments. And what those papers showed made the muscles in Tunde's jaw go tight and stay tight. For 3 years, the household account had paid out 180,000 naira every single month for staff feeding. That money left Tunde's account. It was real. It was documented. And almost none of it reached a plate. The staff potter had done the arithmetic, could not have cost more than 30,000 a month at the absolute most, the way it was being run. The rest, 150,000 a month, vanished into the space between what Tunde paid and what Bisi delivered, and that was only the feeding. The salaries told a darker story. Bisi had been running a scheme so old it was almost elegant. New staff had their salaries held for safekeeping. Some of that held salary was released eventually, in fragments, to the ones who stayed. But most of the staff did not stay. That was the genius of it. Bisi made the house so miserable for the newcomers, worked them so hard, fed them so little, humiliated them so thoroughly, that they broke and ran within 4 or 5 months, before the 6-month holding period was up. And a girl who runs before her holding period ends forfeits her held salary. Those were the rules. Bisi's rules. So the salary was never released at all. It simply stayed. In Bisi's ledger, the girl was recorded as having abandoned her post, and her withheld pay was quietly written into the household accounts as savings returned to the family. Money Tunde never saw, because it was a rounding error to him. 1 line among 10,000, and he had trusted Bisi to manage exactly these lines so that he would never have to. Dare had counted the departed. Over 3 years, 31 girls and boys had passed through the Okafor staff quarters and left before 6 months, 31. Tunde had met perhaps 4 of them. He had not noticed the churn. Why would he? The floors were always clean. The shirts were always ironed. The machine of his comfort had run without interruption, and he had never asked what fuel it burned. And the fuel it burned was human beings, one after another, ground down and discarded, and their wages stolen on the way out. How much? Tunde asked. His voice was very quiet. Dare told him. Over 3 years, between the phantom feeding money and the forfeited wages and a dozen smaller frauds, inflated supplier invoices with Bisi's cut baked in, repairs that were never done, a welfare fund deducted from staff pay that existed nowhere, but on paper, Bisi Adeyemi had stolen a little over 9 million naira from the household, from the mouths, quite literally, of the poorest people Tunde employed. 9 million. To Tunde it was, honestly, not a large sum. He had lost more than that on a single bad shipping contract and shrugged it off. That was the obscenity of it. The amount that had bought Bisi 3 years of feeling like a queen, the amount that had cost 31 young people their wages and their dignity, and in Zara's case, nearly her mother's life. That amount was, to the man at the top, background noise. The gap between what the money meant to the thief and what it meant to the victims was the whole horror of the thing, and Tunde sat with it, and let it burn, and did not look away from the burning. But numbers, he knew, were not enough. Numbers Bisi would explain away. She was clever. She would have a story for every line. He needed people. He needed the ones who had run, and he needed one of them to be willing to stand in a room and say what had been done to them. And this was the hardest part, because the ones who had run were scattered across a city of 20 million, and they were poor, and they were frightened, and they had every reason in the world to never think about the Okafor house again. Dare found her through the old phone records, a girl named Amara Bello, who had lasted 5 months 2 years ago, and had left, the ledger said, by abandonment. Tunde went to see her himself. He did not send a driver. He drove to a 2-room flat in Ketu, and he climbed the stairs himself. And when the door opened and a young woman looked out at him with the wary, closed face of someone who has learned that important-looking men bring trouble, he said, "My name is Tunde Okafor. You worked in my house 2 years ago. I have come to apologize to you and to ask for your help, and I will understand completely if you close this door in my face." Amara did not close the door, but she did not open it wide either. "You are the ogre," she said flatly. "The one who was never there." "Yes," said Tunde. "I am the one who was never there. That is exactly who I am. And I am here now because I found out, 4 days ago, what was happening in my house while I was never there. And I cannot undo the past, but I can stop it from continuing. And I need your help to do it." Amara studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped back and let him in, and in that small hot room, over the next hour, she told him things that made the polished floors of his mansion feel like a lie he had been living inside. She told him about the holding of salaries. She told him about the humiliations, the kneeling, the insults, the way Bisi would find a reason to dock pay every single week, so that even the necessity money shrank and shrank. She told him about a boy who had gotten sick and been told to keep working because sickness is for people who can afford it, and who had collapsed and been sent away without a naira. She told him how she herself had left, not abandoned, run, in the middle of the night, because Bisi had accused her of stealing a bracelet that Bisi had almost certainly taken herself, and had threatened to call the police, and Amara had known, the way poor people always know, that in a contest between a house girl's word and a chief servant's word, the house girl loses, and the house girl goes to a cell. "I ran with nothing," Amara said. 5 months of work, she kept all of it. And I was one of the lucky ones, Oga, because I had a cousin in Lagos to run to. The others had nobody. God knows what happened to the others. She told him one more thing before he left, and it was the thing that stayed with him longest, because it was not about money. In her time in the house, she said, there had been a girl. She never learned her full name, only that they called her Tola, who had gotten pregnant. Whether willingly or not, Amara never knew, and had been thrown out by Bisi in her 5th month with a warning never to come back and never to speak the Okafor name. Bisi told her she had disgraced the house, Amara said, as if the house had ever given her anything to disgrace. As if a girl who cleaned floors 16 hours a day and was paid in insults owed the house her whole body as well. I think about her sometimes. Out there, 5 months pregnant, no wages, no reference, no name she was allowed to use, and the ogre of that house sleeping soundly upstairs, not knowing she had ever existed. Amara looked at him without cruelty, which was worse than if she had been cruel. You were sleeping soundly, ogre, for years. That is not a crime the police can charge you with. But it is not nothing, either. Tunde did not defend himself. There was no defense. He wrote the name Tola in his notebook, though he had almost nothing to find her with, and he resolved that if she could be found, she would be. It would take him a long time, but he would look. He was, at last, a man who looked. "Will you say all of this?" Tunde asked. "In front of her. In front of witnesses. I will protect you. Whatever you need, a lawyer, money for your time, anything. But I need the truth spoken out loud in a room where she cannot twist it. Will you come?" Amara was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that Tunde carried with him for the rest of his life. "You know why she got away with it for so long," she said. "It is not because she is clever, although she is clever. It is because to you, we were not real. We were not people with names. We were the thing that made the floors clean. You did not need to know our names because Bisi was the one who dealt with us, and you paid Bisi so you would never have to look. That is how she ate for 12 years, Ogre. She ate in the space where you refused to look." Amara met his eyes. "Yes, I will come, but not for you. For the ones who had nobody to run to. And so that the next girl who comes to that house is a person before she is a floor." While Tunde was building his case in the shadows, something was happening in the house that he had not planned for, and that would tell him more about Zara Nwosu than any spreadsheet ever could. He had, in the days after the kitchen, changed how he moved through his own home. He came down earlier. He noticed things. He learned the names of every member of staff. All of them, said out loud, to their faces, which made Bisi's eyes narrow, though she said nothing. He arranged, quietly, for Zara to be given proper food, told Bisi it was on his instruction, and to be logged, and watched Bisi's smooth face absorb the instruction and file it away as a threat she did not yet understand. He was laying traps, and he was gathering rope, and he was, without quite admitting it to himself, watching Zara, waiting to see who she really was when the pressure came off even slightly. The watch was a Patek Philippe. It had been his father's, not the trucking years. Before that, the one good thing his father had owned, and pawned and redeemed, and pawned again through all the hard years, and had pressed into Tunde's hand on his deathbed with a strength that a dying man should not have had. It was worth, on the open market, more than the 9 million Bisi had stolen. To Tunde it was worth nothing that could be counted, because it was the only piece of his father he had left. He forgot it in a jacket, a grey linen jacket sent down with the week's laundry, the watch still in the inside breast pocket where he had slipped it at a function and forgotten it in the fog of 100 handshakes. The laundry was Zara's responsibility now. She found it when she checked the pockets. Because a good laundress always checks the pockets, and Zara, whatever else the world had done to her, was good at her work. Her hand closed around it. She drew it out, and she stood in the wash-house with a watch in her palm that she understood, even not knowing the brand, even not knowing the history, was worth more money than she had ever held, or seen, or dreamed of holding. Enough money to solve everything. Enough for every dialysis session her mother would ever need. Enough to walk out of that house tonight and never look back and buy her mother a decade of Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays. It was all right there, in her hand, warm from the sun through the window. Nobody had seen her find it. Bisi had trained the house well. There were no cameras in the wash-house, because Bisi did not want cameras where Bisi worked. Zara could have put it in her sock, in her mattress, with her hidden coins, and by the time anyone thought to look, she could have been on a bus to Nsuka. Who would believe a house girl over a chief? Nobody. Nobody ever did. She could take it. And the world's own cruelty, the same cruelty that said a house girl's word was worthless, would help her get away. She stood there for a long time. Later, she could not have told you how long. Then she wrapped the watch in a clean handkerchief, and she carried it up through the house, past Bisi, past every room, to the study where the ogre did his papers in the evenings, and she knocked, and when he said enter, she came in with her eyes down and set the wrapped watch on the corner of his desk. "This was in the grey jacket, sir," she said, "in the inside pocket. I did not want it to go into the wash. It looks important." And she turned to leave. "Zara," she stopped. Tunde had unwrapped the handkerchief. He was looking at his father's watch on his desk. He was looking at it as though it had come back from the dead, which in a sense it had. When he looked up at her, his face was doing something complicated. "Do you know what this is?" "No, sir. Only that it looks expensive. It is worth more than this house pays every single person on the staff, all of them together, in 10 years. He watched her face as he said it. He watched, specifically, for the flicker, the calculation, the regret, the dawning understanding of what she could have done. It was not there. There was only a small widening of the eyes, and then nothing, because to Zara the number was so large it had no meaning, and the watch had already left her hands, and her hands were already empty, and that was simply how things were. You found this in an empty room, with nobody watching. and you carried it straight to me. It is yours, sir, Zara said, as though this settled everything, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. It is not mine. Zara, I know about your mother. I know about the dialysis. I know what this money would mean to you. He was leaning forward now. He needed her to understand what he was saying, needed her to know he was not laying a trap. You could have taken this. Do you understand me? You could have solved everything. And no one. I mean this. No one on this earth would have been able to prove you did. Why didn't you? And Zara looked at him. This girl who ate in the dark, whose mother was dying in installments, who had knelt on a cold floor and been laughed at. And she seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. The way you are puzzled when someone asks you why you do not simply stop breathing. Because then I would be what she says I am, she said quietly. A thief. She has said it to me every day since I came here, that I am a thief who has not yet been caught. That people like me have no dignity, that we were born low and we will die low. Her chin came up, just slightly, and for the first time since he had met her, Tunde saw the person underneath the fear. My mother is a cleaner, sir. She has cleaned other people's houses her whole life, on her knees, with her hands. And she raised 4 children on nothing. And she taught us that they can take your money, and they can take your strength, and they can take your name, and they can even take your mother. But the one thing no one can take, unless you hand it to them yourself, is what kind of person you are. If I steal that watch to save her, I have already lost her the only way that would break her heart. She would rather die on that machine than have a thief for a daughter. So, she shrugged, a small helpless motion. It is yours, sir. It was never a question. The study was very quiet. Tunde Okafor looked at the watch, and looked at the girl, and thought about the space where he had refused to look, and about the 900 people who cleaned his floors, and moved his cargo, and made his comfort possible, and about how many of them had a mother like this one, a dignity like this one, a whole vast interior life like this one, invisible to him because he had paid other people to keep it invisible. And the thing that had been building in him since the kitchen, the shame, the grief, the terrible late understanding, finally crested. He did not sob. Tunde Okafor was not a man who sobbed. But he put his hand over his eyes. This billionaire, this chief, alone at his desk, with his dead father's watch, and his living employee's dignity, laid side by side in front of him, and his shoulders shook. And when he took his hand away, his face was wet, and he did not bother to hide it. Sit down, Zara, he said when he could speak. Please, sit down. I owe you an apology that is 3 years too late, and I am going to say it anyway, and then I am going to tell you what is going to happen in this house on Saturday. Because on Saturday, my daughter, everyone in this house is going to learn something about their level, and it will not be the lesson they are expecting. She sat, slowly, on the edge of the chair, the way a person sits who has never been invited to sit in a room like this, and does not fully believe the invitation. And Tunde told her. Not everything. He did not tell her about Amara yet, did not tell her about the lawyer, kept some of it back, because he had learned that a plan spoken too early is a plan that leaks. But he told her enough. He told her that he knew now what BC was. He told her he had the numbers, all of them, 3 years of them, in his accountant's careful hand. And then he asked her something that surprised her. When it happens, he said, when the truth comes out in front of everyone, do you want to be there? You do not have to be. Some people would rather not watch. There is no shame in that. But if you want to stand in that room and see it, you have earned the right to, more than anyone. So I am asking you, not telling you, asking, what do you want? It was the second time in a week a powerful person had asked Zara what she wanted, and she was still not used to it, still felt the strange vertigo of being consulted about her own life. She thought about it. She thought about all the mornings she had knelt, about the cold rice, about the sock in the mattress, about Chidi's hollow face and her mother's thread-thin voice. And she found, underneath all the fear that Bisi had planted in her, a small hard seed of something she had almost forgotten she owned. "I want to be there," she said. "Not to gloat, sir. I am not that kind of person. And anyway, gloating is for people who were never truly hurt. I want to be there because for 3 years she looked at me and saw a thief who had not yet been caught. And I want to be standing in that room, on my own 2 feet, when everyone finally sees who the thief actually was. I do not need to say anything. I just want to be seen standing. That is all. Just once. Standing." Tunde Okafor looked at her for a long moment, and then he nodded, slowly, because he understood, and because it was the most reasonable request anyone had ever made of him. "Then you will stand," he said, "Saturday, 10 o'clock. You will stand, Zara, and I promise you, every single person in that room is going to see it." Saturday came. Tunde had told Bisi to gather the entire household staff in the large reception room at 10 in the morning. All of them, no exceptions. Cooks and cleaners and gardeners and drivers and the 2 security men from the gate. He had told her it was a review, a reorganization. Bisi had heard the word reorganization and heard opportunity in it. Because in 12 years, every change in that house had been a change she rode to more power, and she came into that room at 10 o'clock, with her ledger under her arm and her chin high, already composing in her mind the recommendations she would make, the people she would have cut, the tighter grip she would take. She did not notice, at first, the 2 people standing quietly to the side of the room. She did not know Dera Okoro by sight, and she had not seen Amara Bello in 2 years, and did not recognize, in the composed young woman by the window, the terrified girl she had chased into the night with threats of the police. Tunde came in last. He did not sit. He stood before them all, and Zara stood among the staff with her heart going like a hammer, because she, alone in that room, besides Tunde, knew what was coming, and even she did not know the shape of it. "I want to thank you all for your work," Tunde began. "This house runs because of you. I have not said that to you enough. In fact," he paused, "I have not said it to most of you at all, because until 2 weeks ago I did not know most of your names. That was a failure. My failure. I am the head of this house, and a head that does not know its own body is not a head, it is an ornament. I have been an ornament. That ends today." Bisi's smile was patient, indulgent. The ogre was being sentimental. It would pass. "Bisi," Tunde said, "how much do we spend each month feeding the staff?" A flicker. Just a flicker. Then the smooth answer. 180,000, sir. As you approve every month. I keep everyone well fed, sir. You know this. I run a tight house, but a fair one. "A fair one," Tunde repeated. "Dare, the feeding." Dare Okoro stepped forward and began to read. He read flatly without drama, which made it worse, the way a doctor reads a diagnosis. He read the 180,000 that went out each month. He read what the staff pot actually cost, reconstructed from the market purchases. Never more than 30. He read the gap. He read it multiplied by 36 months. He read the number that was left over, the 150,000 a month that had no destination on any honest page. And as he read, the smile on Bisi's face did not so much fall as freeze, cracking at the edges like ice on a pond that someone has just stepped onto. "Sir," she said, "there are costs you do not. There is wastage, there is spoilage, the market is expensive now." "The prices, said Tunde, for a moment. "Dare the salaries." And Dare read the salaries. He read the holding scheme. He read the 31 young people who had come and gone in 3 years, and the pattern of their leaving, always just before the 6-month mark, always recorded as abandonment, always with their held wages quietly kept. And here Bisi found her feet again, because this was the ground she knew, and she drew herself up. "Those girls abandoned their posts," she said, and her voice had iron in it now, the old iron that had made grown women kneel. "That is the rule, and it is a good rule, and you approved it yourself, sir. If they run, they forfeit. I did not make them run. Village girls are ungrateful and lazy, and they run at the first hardship, and it is not my fault, and it is not this house's fault, and I will not stand here and be accused." "They ran," said a voice by the window, "because you made it impossible to stay." Bisi turned, and she saw Amara bellow, and Tunde watched the recognition hit her, watched 12 years of certainty develop a fault line down its center. "You," Bisi said. "Me." Amara walked forward. She was not the girl who had run. She had had 2 years to become someone who did not run, and she used every day of it now. "You told me I stole a bracelet. You threatened me with the police. You kept 5 months of my wages. I have come to give it back to you. Not the money. You can keep your stolen money. It will do to you what stolen things always do. I have come to give back the fear." She turned to the staff, to the frightened faces of the people who still lived under Bisi's hand. "She is not a queen. She was never a queen. She is a thief who kept us hungry and afraid, so that we would be too weak to notice we were being robbed, and the ogre did not know. I used to hate him for not knowing, but not knowing is over now." "This is a conspiracy," Bisi said, and her voice had climbed, and the iron in it was cracking into something shrill. "This girl is a known liar, a thief. She was dismissed for stealing, sir. You cannot possibly believe, after 12 years of my faithful service, you would take the word of a house girl and a what?" Tunde said. His voice was very quiet, and the quiet stopped her cold. "Finish it, Bisi. A house girl and a what? Say the word you have said to all of them, every day, for 12 years. Say it to my face. Tell me what their level is." Bisi did not finish it. "There is a lawyer arriving at 11, Tunde said to the room, but mostly to her. "And after him, if I choose, the police. The evidence Dare has assembled is not a matter of one girl's word against yours. It is your own ledger, Bisi, in your own hand, against the bank records in mine. 12 years. 9 million naira that we have found so far. 31 young people whose wages you stole and whose dignity you tried to steal, though in at least one case. And here his eyes found Zara. Just for a moment, you failed at the second part entirely, because it turns out dignity is the one thing you were never able to take, no matter how hard you tried." He stepped closer to Bisi, and the whole room held its breath. "You told them to know their level," he said. "So, let me tell you yours. Your level is a woman who fed on the poorest people in this house for 12 years because she was certain that the man at the top would never look down. You were almost right. You were years right. But a flight was delayed, Bisi. That is all it took, in the end. A delayed flight, and a girl eating cold rice in the dark, and a man who finally looked down. You built your entire kingdom on my blindness, and I have opened my eyes." He turned away from her. "Take her ledger. Dare, escort her to wait for the lawyer. She does not go near the staff quarters. She does not go near anyone's belongings. And someone open a window. It is stifling in here." For a moment, nobody moved. 12 years is a long time to be afraid of a person, and fear does not evaporate the instant you are told it is safe to stop. The staff stood frozen, watching Bisi the way you watch a snake that has been pinned but not yet killed, half expecting her to rise up one last time and strike. And Bisi, sensing it, tried. She turned to them, to her old kingdom. and opened her mouth to summon the old power. "After everything I have done for you people, you will stand there and—" It was Chidi who moved first, the houseboy. 19 years old, the hungry one, the one Zara had fed in the dark without ever telling him why. He did not shout, he did not accuse. He simply walked across the room, past Bisi, without looking at her, as though she were already gone, already nothing, already a story that had ended. And he went and stood beside Zara, and after him a cook moved, and after the cook a gardener, and one by one, in a silence more damning than any shouting, the entire staff of the house crossed the floor and left Bisi standing alone in the middle of the room she had ruled, surrounded by empty space, which is the truest picture of what she had always been. She had told them every day to know their level, and in the end they had all quietly learned it. It simply was not the level she had meant. Their level was this: they were people. They had crossed a room together on their own feet and left a thief standing in her own emptiness, and no one had needed to say a single word. The lawyer came at 11. The police were not called that day. Tund made a colder, more lasting choice. He recovered every naira the law would let him recover, which was most of it, because Bisi had been arrogant enough to keep her stolen money in accounts a court could reach. He reported the fraud formally, so that it was on record, so that Bisi Adeyemi could never again walk into another family's home with 12 years of glowing references and begin again. And he made certain, through channels a man of his weight has access to, that every domestic staffing agency in Lagos knew her name and knew what she had done. He did not put her in a cell. He did something she found harder to survive. He took away her ability to ever again be trusted with the vulnerable, and he sent her out into the world as what she was, with nothing but the reputation she had earned. That was Bisi's karma, not a prison, a mirror. But the story does not end with the wicked getting what they deserved, because that is the small half of justice, the loud half, the half that makes you feel good for an evening and changes nothing. The larger half, the quiet half, the half that actually mattered to Tunde now, was what he built in the space Bisi left behind. He paid Zara everything. Every naira of the salary that had been held and never released. Not the fragments Bisi had planned to dole out, the whole of it, backdated to her first day. He paid directly to the teaching hospital for a full year of her mother's dialysis in advance, so that no Tuesday or Thursday would ever again depend on a sock full of coins hidden in a mattress. He did not make her grovel for it. He did not present it as charity, as the great man lifting up the wretched, because he had learned, Amara had taught him, in a hot room in Ketu, that charity given from above is just another way of not seeing the person. He presented it as a debt, because that is what it was. The house had owed her. He had owed her. He was paying what was owed, and then he asked her what she wanted. Not what she needed. Anyone can guess what a poor person needs, what she wanted. It is a question the poor are almost never asked, and Zara had to sit with it for a while before she could even answer, because wanting was a muscle she had not been allowed to use. She wanted to be a nurse. Because of the machine, she said. Because of all the Tuesdays and Thursdays she had imagined at her mother's bedside and been too far away to attend. Because the nurses at the teaching hospital, her aunt told her, were the ones who made the difference between a dialysis patient who despaired and one who kept fighting. And she wanted to be that difference for somebody's mother, the way she could not be for her own. So Tunde paid for that too, not as a gift. As an investment, he called it. And he meant it. He put her through nursing school, and he did it on the record. The first of what would become a foundation. Because the man who had spent 3 years not knowing 31 names had decided that the rest of his life would be spent making sure the invisible people got seen. He restructured the entire household. Every member of staff was paid directly into their own bank account. No holding, no intermediary. Their salaries set at nearly double what BC had been claiming to pay. He set up something that had never existed in that house. A way for the lowest person on the staff to speak to the highest, directly without going through anyone. A number they could call, a door that was actually open. He knew, being honest with himself, that no system is proof against every BC the world produces. But he also knew that BC had fed for 12 years specifically in the dark space where no one could speak upward. And he was determined that in his house, that space would never exist again. Nursing school was not easy for her. She had left secondary school early, when the money first ran out, and she had to be tutored in the sciences she had missed. Sitting up late with textbooks after long days, the way she had once sat up late with plates in the dark. Except now the thing she was consuming was knowledge, and no one made her hide it. There were nights she wanted to quit. Chemistry defeated her again and again. But she had learned something in that kitchen that no lecturer could teach, and no examination could measure. How to keep going when the numbers refused to agree. How to pick the plate back up off the floor. A girl who has decided not to give up on her mother's life does not give up easily on anything. She failed her pharmacology paper once. She sat it again and passed. She did not tell anyone how close she had come to walking away, because by then she understood that the distance between quitting and continuing is often just one more morning of getting up, and she had a great deal of practice at getting up. Zara Nwosu qualified as a nurse 3 years later. Her mother kept steady by dialysis that no longer depended on hidden coins, lived to see it, sat in the front row, in fact. In a wrapper Zara bought her with her own first salary, and wept the way mothers weep when a child has carried the family further than the family dared to dream. Tunde Okafor was there too, at the back, where no one would make a fuss over him. And when Zara crossed the stage, he did not clap louder than anyone else, because he had learned that too, that the point was never his generosity. The point was her walking across that stage on her own 2 feet, having done the work herself. He had opened a door. She had walked through it. Those are 2 different things, and only a fool confuses the second for the first. Zara works now at the teaching hospital on the renal ward, with the machines that once terrified her, and she is, they say, the nurse the frightened patients ask for by name, because she has a way of making a person on a dialysis chair feel like a person and not a case. She knows something about that. She learned it the hard way, in the dark, with a plate of cold rice. She and Tunde are not family. Fairy tales would make them family, would marry her to his son, or reveal she was his long-lost daughter, or some other neat bow. Life is not a fairy tale, and the truth is better than the bow. They are something rarer than family. They are 2 people, one who was blind and one who was starving, who met in a kitchen at midnight, and each gave the other back something they had lost. He gave her a future. She gave him his eyes. Here is what I keep coming back to when I think about this story. It is very easy to hate BC. She is easy to hate, and she earned every ounce of it, and hating her costs us nothing. But BC is not really the danger. BC is a symptom. The danger is the space she fed in. The space between the man who signs the check and the person whose plate it was meant for. Most of us are not BC, but almost all of us, at some point, are Tunde before the delayed flight. We approve the number and never ask about the plate. We are kind to the people we see and blind to the people who are kept unseen for our convenience. We assume that because we are not cruel, no cruelty is being done in our name. In the rooms we pay other people to manage, so that we never have to enter them. The lesson of this story is not that a rich man was generous. Generosity is cheap for the rich. It costs Tunde nothing to write a check. The lesson is what came before the generosity, the looking. The choosing to see the name behind the labor, the mother behind the house girl, the whole vast human life behind the person who makes your comfort possible, and whom you have trained yourself not to notice. That is the expensive thing. That is the thing almost no one does. And a girl kept her dignity in the dark long enough for one powerful man to finally do it, and that. Not the money, not the downfall of the wicked. The looking. That is what changed everything. So the next time someone cleans up after you, or serves your food, or moves through your life in a uniform designed to make them invisible, look at them. Learn the name. Ask the question the poor are never asked. You may never know what a delayed flight of your own attention could interrupt. You may never know whose midnight, in the dark, you could end. That is worth more than 9 million naira. That is worth more than any watch. If this story moved you, do not keep it to yourself. Somewhere right now, someone is eating in the dark, and someone else has simply never thought to look. Share it, and tell me, down in the comments. Has there ever been a person in your own life whose name you finally learned, whose story you finally saw? I read everyone. Tell me where you are watching from, and what the time is where you sit tonight. And if you want more stories that leave you a little more awake to the people around you than you were before, subscribe. And stay. There is always another one coming, and every single one of them is about somebody the world decided not to see. Until the next story, keep your eyes open. You never know whose life is waiting in the space where you have not yet looked.